There's like no rule of thumb.
Parents, they want their kids to be in the business.
In a way, I'm a competitor to his.
You actually design them all yourself.
Lily! It's $20 now, but if it breaks down and starts to fall apart, which it will.
What is your thought process on how do you make yourself stand out? Hello everyone and welcome to Design Discussions with Nadine. I am Nadine and today's guest is Priya Vij and she's with Hapny Home.
Hi, thank you.
It's so good to have you. Hapny Home is a designer and manufacturer of hardware for all things cabinets and even appliances,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
What I love about your company is it's solid brass.
Yes.
So it's very good quality. So I want to get people to get to know you a little bit more, show some of your products, and go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Excited to chat.
So I know that you have quite an extensive history in the hardware business. Your dad had been in the business for 40 years, so you
Yes.
kind of grew up with this in your life.
Yes.
Right?
Totally.
So that's great that you actually stayed in the business, because a lot of people, I know most people as parents, they want their kids to be in the business they're in, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way.
No, exactly. And it's a bit funny with mine because I stayed in the business, but my dad and I joke, in a way, I'm a competitor to his also. So I didn't just follow in his footsteps like he would have loved, but I did it with my own little twist. But at the end of the day, we are still working together. And of course, it is a family of brands, but it is funny because I chose to make my own brand separate from his. But I mean, it absolutely is tied to the fact that he has had his company my whole life. I grew up around that. I had so much experience consciously and subconsciously that I then applied to what is happening today.
And you mentioned that you've been to all the trade shows.
Yes.
You've been to many, many, many when you were growing up. So how do you feel that that helped you in what you're doing now?
I think it makes such a big difference to see, like I can look online, I can do a lot of research at home, and even just going to showrooms that carry my products, I'm seeing stuff in market, but especially a big show like the Kitchen and Bath Show in Vegas, that's probably the biggest one for our industry and has been for a long time. To go and actually see these huge booths and see all the people and see how they present the product, and also more importantly for me, how people interact with it and how they look at them, how they're grabbing them. I think I learn a lot just by seeing, of course, what a brand puts out there and how they present it, but then also how a customer or someone who's interested, what is it that they're actually doing with the product? Because are they grabbing it? Does it need to be loose? Does it need to be on a board? Does it need to be big? Does it need to be small? So like all these more minute details that maybe you're not really paying attention to or thinking about, that's what I really started to subconsciously pick up. And then of course, now that I have my own brand, that's something that I'm thinking about all the time when it comes to how to best present my product and my brand when I go out into the world.
Yeah, and the touch and feel of it, I think, is very important. And I notice that too when I go shopping with my clients, when we're looking at hardware, the first thing is they're grabbing it and they're like, how is this going to feel in my hand when I'm opening a cabinet door?
Yeah.
And then you get the responses back on some, ooh, I don't like that.
Totally.
Oh, this feels so comfortable and nice. So yes, that's very important to think about.
Well, and I think from a design aspect too, of course, it sounds obvious, Miss Lily. It sounds kind of obvious when you say it and once you feel it, but I don't think I really appreciated that until I actually started designing the products myself, because things like texture, which is something super interesting that I want to incorporate, I never really thought about, okay, but where should the texture be? Or if I'm carving out a shape and doing some negative space, is dirt going to fall in there? Is it big enough for like dirt to be clean? So there's all these little details with the touch and feel that, you're looking at it, and that's again where like being in person, getting to feel it, going to a showroom or some sort of physical brick and mortar store, I think will always be super important for hardware, because it is something that you need to touch and grab. And unlike a lot of home accessories and home decor items, you actually are going to be touching and grabbing this multiple times a day. So I think everything needs to feel nice and look nice to a certain extent, but with hardware, it is such a crucial part of what that product development looks like.
And that's great. And speaking of that, I know you design all of your products, right?
Yeah.
You're not somebody that just goes to these trade shows to find somebody to supply your brand. You actually design them all yourself.
Yes, I do.
So what is your design process, and how does it come from going from here to the actual product? I know you mentioned a little bit of that just now and how you kind of, conceptualize things. But typically, what is your process on your designs?
It's fun because, again, this is one of the things that I think I saw my dad doing this all throughout growing up. And it looked a little bit different back then, of course, to start a company 40 years ago, especially when so many of these big names kind of started around the same time. So it was a newer market in that sense. So I think you could get away with maybe paying less attention to design details, if that makes sense. But for now, I think a lot of what I do and a lot of why I wanted to make my own brand is because I feel very plugged into adjacent and parallel industries. And there's so much inspiration that you can get with social media. But I do think social media is starting to get taking a bit of a turn. I sometimes go on social media and I'm less inspired than when I started. There's so much out there and it ends up kind of being a bit homogenous. So a lot of what I do when I want to come up with a new design is I'm just paying attention to a bunch of different types of things. So travel and like going out in the world, seeing different types of cultures and places and landscapes, and architecture helps a lot. Furniture is a really natural way to look for inspiration, just the shapes and the curves of what's going in the space. And it makes sense too, since in theory the hardware will be in the same room as some of the furniture. A lot of fashion, jewelry is a good source of inspiration, purses, handbags, a lot of just like what's trending. And so respectfully for my father, I would say I'm a bit more plugged into that stuff than he is. So I just naturally, being a consumer of those things in my personal life has always just then subconsciously kind of allowed me to look at shapes a little differently and get inspired. And again, one of the cool things about hardware is that it really just is a bunch of shapes with like two stems, if you want to break it down to its simplest form. And so there's a lot of freedom in that way of the different types of things you can pull together, as long as it kind of has a start and an end of where it will connect to your drawer or your door. You can kind of do whatever you want in the middle. And so there's a lot of cool stuff that you can get really creative with when it comes to coming up with like new shapes and new styles. And then it's the balance of, okay, I love the shape, I love this texture, and then it's a bit of what you were talking about. Okay, but then how does it feel? Does it make sense to have this here? Should this be, so like my ribbed pull, for instance, I loved fluting and I wanted to have texture, but I kept it just to the stems on that product. So that way when you're grabbing the pull, you're actually grabbing something that's plain and has no texture. So it feels really soft, it's comfortable, it's easy to clean. But then the stems, you can see the fluting, you get that design element. So it's thinking through like the more nuances of how to incorporate the cool, fun, funky things, but still make it feel really practical, really comfortable, and something that you honestly don't even think about, because in so many ways, I don't want you to be thinking about your hardware when you're grabbing it.
Yeah. And there's so many companies out there that do this, and it's really hard for people to narrow down what they want, and it's just can be so overwhelming. And I say the same thing with lighting. For people, it's the same thing. So how do you stand out from others that do what you do? Like, what is your thought process on how do you, make yourself stand out?
Yeah, it's a bit daunting. And it was a bit daunting even when I made the choice to make my own brand versus just kind of piggybacking off my dad and modernizing his. That was a big point of conversation I had with myself of like, in a way, it would be so much easier because he's been in the market, he has the brand recognition, he has the retail space. But the same reason that I felt there was an opportunity to make my own is kind of what I looked at when I looked at the market. So there are a lot of options out there. There's a lot of price points. There's a lot of base materials. There's a lot of finishes. And it is just objectively very overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing. And I, as someone who had a father who did it, I also felt overwhelmed. And so that was where I started to pick up on that and be like, okay, there's something here that I think I can explore and maybe create a different type of hardware company, not in a revolutionary way, but just in the sense of getting after this feeling of like anxiety and overwhelming nature of looking at all this hardware and also just not fully understanding why things cost like different prices, why things look different, what's gonna last better and longer. And so I tried to strip away a lot of the noise with Hapny, especially at the beginning. And so I came out with, I just wanted to do a few collections, which I think in a space where some of these big guys have and my dad included, have like hundreds of product collections because you want to appeal to the masses and kind of touch every and like check every box. I went the opposite way of, okay, I want to be a little more niche. I want to be more curated, and I could go a little bit like whimsical and over the top, and I do that with some of my designs, but I wanted to kind of hit this mainstream where it's still commercial, it still feels timeless, it still feels classic, but it has something interesting to it that stands out. And I think like having a brand name like Hapny, a lot of the brand names in the space were kind of people's last names or like something with knobs. And so introducing a name that had more emotion and had more storytelling behind it. I have some colors, my logo is a smiley face.
Yeah.
Like some of these things feel maybe a little silly, but hardware was an industry where that just didn't exist. And a lot of the people who run these companies are my dad's peers and contemporaries. And so there wasn't really a younger voice coming in. Now there are, I'm seeing more and more pop up. So there was definitely like this opportunity area where I launched Hapny to just bring something a little more fresh and emotional and have a little bit more fun. That was the main thing.
I love how you named your company.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to know, Hapny is based on the letters of the place, some of the places you have lived.
Yeah.
So Houston, Austin, Portland, and New York.
Yes, exactly.
And that's so clever.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's a very cute name. And like you mentioned, it sounds like happy.
Yeah.
So that's so great.
I know. And I have a smiley face knob. That was actually one of the first, like that's kind of the spirit, I think, of Hapny is one of the first ideas I had was like a smiley face knob would just be so cute. Yeah. Like it's so, and again, like hardware can be anything, but no one was really having fun with it. It just felt very functional. And it is very functional, but I think there's room to play. And it is such like an impactful decision in your home and in your space. And so it shouldn't feel so daunting. It shouldn't feel so like, okay, this is boring, but it just like works well and it gets the job done. I wanted to kind of poke holes at that and just be like, okay, but it can look really nice and it can make you smile and it can just be something that's like a conversation starter even in your space. Like it doesn't have to be something that just is functional.
And like I mentioned before, the hardware for cabinetry is the final piece of a whole room.
Exactly.
So, and a lot of people might not think about that, but I think if you look at a room that doesn't have hardware on cabinets and then you look at one that does, it just literally brings, Lily, stop that.
Being crazy.
It literally just brings the whole room together and just adds something so special to it. So it is a very important piece to interior design is hardware.
It is.
And I think any interior designer, Vanessa, will agree with that. It's a very important piece of the puzzle.
I agree. And I love that you say that. I wholeheartedly,
I'm
obviously.
sure.
That is what I believe. It's one of the last decisions you make. It is one of those things that pulls the entire space together. The finish really makes a difference if you're using black or gold or silver. Those are things, again, that maybe you don't really think about, but once you start to look at it, and even if you go from one finish of hardware to another finish of hardware, can drastically change the way that a room feels, which is really cool.
Yeah. What are you seeing now is kind of or maybe you have an opinion or don't, the most popular things that are being sold right now, or as far as hardware goes?
Yeah.
What is popular right now?
What I'm hearing a lot of and kind of seeing, so now I've been in business for about 2.5 years. So I've been getting enough of a sense of directionally, at least, like what finishes are doing really well. We're still really big on gold, satin brass, and that muted brass is still one of my top sellers. I'm seeing more of like distressed and antique finishes have a comeback. So like antique brass. I have a distressed nickel that is like a distressed darker nickel silver color, like more like a gray. I'm seeing that start to pick up more. Black has been very popular, but I think I'm seeing more of the shift towards these gray, silver, nickels. And that's where then like the distressed elements add some of that depth and darkness, but they're not as stark of a contrast.
It seems like it's a little bit more elevated to me than just black.
I think so. It's just more interesting because then even like if you have an interesting design of the hardware too, then just having these distressed details are just like an additional design element that kind of draw your eye to it in a cool way. So I'm seeing more of that. Unlacquered brass is huge. I kind of hear it. It's very polarizing.
Yeah.
But I am going to launch it in some of my collections this year because I've just gotten enough feedback. I don't currently have it, but I hear enough enough people who just love it. Do you like unlacquered brass?
I do.
Yeah.
I really love it. And I think it takes a special person to really like it, because some people just don't like that, what it does over time, and they don't want it. But then you have the special clients that just absolutely adore it. And it's cool. It's beautiful. I think it is cool.
Yeah.
Start with one thing.
And then
and then
as
it
you
turns
use
into
it,
something else.
I think that's such a special relationship to have with your hardware, if you're ready for it. I think if you want that and you know it's going to change, and it's also going to change differently from other pieces, yes. But that's where I think maybe the antique and distressed kind of gets after the spirit of unlacquered brass, but is a more standard and standardized form of it. So it kind of can check that box too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And getting back to the fact that all of your products are solid brass is great, because that gives longevity to a product for sure. A lot of people can go on, Amazon or wherever and kind of purchase hardware pools, and people do it, but they might not necessarily be getting the quality of the product. And I think that also comes into play with price points on what people think is, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend $20 on one pool or more.
Totally.
But then the consideration of the longevity of it, because you do use it every day, as you mentioned.
You use it so many times a day, and it's $20 now, but if it breaks down and starts to fall apart, which it will in a couple of months, then you're paying, it kind of goes, it's true with a bunch of different types of products, but with hardware, that was another differentiating factor is, my price point is higher than average because I'm using brass, because I am trying to be more intentional with the design. But that was, again, a choice that I wanted to make to be differentiated, is that's kind of this thing that I'm going to stick to. It's going to be brass. What that also does is the finish, the way it sits on the product, is a little bit more consistent and uniform. And then if your plumbing or your lighting fixtures and the other complementary fixtures are also the same brass base, my finishes have a higher likelihood of matching. Because that's one of the other things, is the finishes are going to look different, not to get super technical, but the finishes are going to they're going to look different on different base materials. And so that's just another consideration for when you're pulling together different pieces in a room. You want to think about what the base material is of all of your fixtures, because that's just going to increase the chance that they're going to complement each other better. And so just those different things. And for simplicity, I think if I'm going to make something, especially if I was I'm going to make a company that's different and separate from my father's, I want to make something that's quality. I want to make something that's going to last. I don't want to just add to the noise that already exists. And so that was a big lever for me that I really wanted to focus on.
That's great. So you had spent some time in New York. You studied there. So as most people know, New York is one of those meccas of design. It's, one of the places around the world. So how do you feel like that affected how you look at things as far as design perspective?
I think it affected me so much, and I probably didn't even really realize it at the time until I started to look more. And now, of course, I'm working in more of a design field. I just have so many reference points and just a baseline of knowledge that I feel comfortable tapping into from days of going to, of course, the big museums, but especially even the smaller galleries, the smaller communities. And so I grew up in Houston. I had a pretty sheltered life. My parents were quite strict. I went to an all-girls school. So going to New York for college was my entire world blew open.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
And I think I obviously in those years when I was in Houston, I was looking at my dad's hardware, but I never really had another comparison or outlet for creative design angles. And so when I went to New York, that was the first time I think I started to realize I was actually interested in that. So obviously I had the baseline, but I would choose to spend my time going to look at art and looking at, again, these shapes and these forms, and just the way that a space just sometimes, which I'm sure you can appreciate, just looks right. And there's no rhyme or reason. It's not a formula. It just kind of all comes together in this way where you're that's beautiful and that feels good. And trying to break it apart sometimes helps, but sometimes you can't even just pinpoint it. It just has that something. I really started to tap into that and try to understand more of that feeling. How can I start to do that for my own space was all I was thinking about at the time. But now that's something that I definitely carry through to when I design product.
I'm sure. Now, you've been featured in some magazines.
I have.
Which is very exciting.
Yes,
like House Beautiful and Martha Stewart Living and others.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's an exciting experience to have.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's incredible.
And what would you say is the biggest one that you're proud of?
One that I'm really proud of is apartment therapy. Actually, this year for I guess 2024, I was chosen as one of their design change makers, which is like a dream come true to me. And my Smiley knob especially got a design award from them, which is, again, like I mentioned, it's one of the first products I came up with and such of like emblematic of the spirit of Hapny and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So it feels especially special to have that one be the one that's recognized. But that was a really proud moment for me. Was the features across House Beautiful was huge. Martha Stewart, the kitchen, the spruce. I've been mentioned in quite a few publications, but getting that design award and getting that recognition was just, it was really, really cool and something that still feels surreal.
That people recognize what you're doing is great and gives you really great motivation to keep going.
That's why I'm doing it. I love it. So it was, especially so early on, I think it was such great validation to your point.
So there was a slight mention of you're not direct to consumer, but you're in many, many showrooms nationwide. So I want to kind of give a little bit of a tip for people that now that they're seeing your products, so how can they find you?
Yes, so I have a website that has my list of dealers and stockists across the country. We're in over 200 showrooms, which is amazing. And we are on a lot of the key online marketplaces. So I've been able to get across, I've been able to do a lot and just have a lot of people believe and buy into the product, which again is such validation and so special so early on to just get that feedback. But you're able to go to my site to easily find a breakdown of showrooms by state. And then again, at the top, there's also all these online marketplaces if there's not a showroom in your area. Hopefully we will continue to grow our showroom presence across all the states, but we're able to kind of get our product pretty widely across different communities of designers and builders and just end consumers, which has been great.
That's wonderful. So with all the interior designers that are watching this, if they're interested in your products, how would you say is the best way to go about, other than just going to your website and kind of looking at showrooms? Because that's, of course, work for the designer to have to go look and then try to find. But if they want something specific or if they want more information, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I would say reach out to me directly. If you do go to my website, my email and phone number are on there, and I can share that as well. But I'm definitely, it is still part of the joys and sometimes the hardships of being a new business owner is that it is just me. But the perk is that it is just me. So if you want to reach out, I'm the one that can help guide you to what you're looking for. We can get sample boxes together. I have some display boards. I have literature. So I kind of have all of the basic needs that you would probably want access to, but we can curate it based on exactly what you're looking for.
That's great. So if they're having a situation where they're looking for a specific design, you can help them to find it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. So with the ever-changing design, you say you have some new ones coming out? So let's talk about those.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, unlacquered brass as a new finish is something I'm going to offer to my existing collections, and I'm probably going to bring that in some new collections this year. I am also going to add some center-to-center sizes to my cabinet pulls. So one of the trends that we were talking about that I didn't mention is that longer is what I keep hearing. Longer, longer, bigger, bigger. So I'm going to expand my center-to-center size offerings for cabinet pulls and potentially even look at bigger appliance pulls because I'm hearing a lot of directional data that's going in that area. And I'm going to launch one new design that has a cool knurling detail. So it's kind of in the spirit of my ribbed collection that I was mentioning, where it's a little bit of textured detail off the main part of the bar. So I'll have a little knurling design coming soon.
Beautiful.
And then hope to bring at least one or two more before the end of the year as well. Part of what I'm exploring right now is kind of taking a step back and doing some elevated basics, like I was mentioning. So I don't have, Lily.
Oops.
She looks so guilty.
She's like
I didn't do it.
She's like, I'm going to interrupt you.
I didn't do it.
I'm going to be the star of the show now. Let's stop talking about hardware and talk about Lily.
I love it. She's like, not me.
Girl, you are really something.
That's so funny.
But you've been being so good this whole time.
She has. She needed a little
you don't
moment.
Want that. Yeah, she needed it. All right.
So anyway, continue. Lily, what I was saying is just looking at kind of some standard shapes. So I don't have a really simple round knob that doesn't have any design detail on it. So looking to bring like some elevated basics is how I would call them and grow the collection that way while still having some fun with some cool shapes and silhouettes. So all of that is to come soon.
That's good. That's good. Are you going to KBiz?
I probably will be at KBiz, yes. I
I'll
still
be there
have to
too.
decide. Oh, great.
Okay.
Love that. See you there. Yeah,
Yeah.
KBiz, and then I'm also looking to do some smaller shows this year, I think. So there's one in Houston with DPHA. I just joined that association. And there's a West Edge Design Fair in LA. That's the later part of this year, so I'll probably be there. So looking to grow my presence at trade shows as well, not just as attending, but hopefully showing.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Well, my last and final question that I always ask everybody, and I think I prepped you a little bit for this one. So any horror story or funny story that you can share with the audience for entertainment value?
I don't know how entertaining. I was telling you, part of it is I'm protected a little bit by not being direct to consumer and not being in the field and more just being a vendor in a lot of these situations. I think some horror stories I've had just from managing the business perspective is one of the hardest things about hardware is that there is no standardization when it comes to center size or length, and there is no standardization when it comes to how many pieces of hardware go into a room. It totally varies space to space. So I have had some really hard inventory situations that I've gotten myself into where part of that is just growing pains of the business, but I think especially with hardware, there's no rule of thumb. And so I'll get some orders for onesie twosies, and then all of a sudden I'll get a huge order for an entire house and it'll blow through my stock. And there also is this weird contingency between products. If you have the knobs and pulls that you love and I have those in stock, but I don't have the appliance pull in stock, then I'm probably going to lose that order. So there's this dependency across the products too that definitely has been more of a nightmare than a horror story. But
well, it's still, I
through.
can understand that inventory thing is a problem to try to figure out and just gauge what's happening and what people want and all of that. It takes some good thought and effort to go into that,
and
for sure.
It changes quite frequently. So just trying to grow with it is all part of the fun, but it also is probably one of the hardest parts of managing the business. And so I've had some tough situations where I've just been out of stock and need to scramble to get inventory. So that's probably one of the hardest things I've dealt with so far.
Okay. Well, that's not too bad considering some of the horror stories that I've heard from people were pretty
Hopefully
bad.
I remain unscathed for the most part. Yeah.
That's good. Well, it was such a pleasure talking to you.
It was so great chatting with you and Miss Lily.
Yeah, getting to know you a little bit better and your products and your history. I hope everybody else enjoyed this episode and we'll sit down and look at products that you have to offer and see what you got.
Love it.
So until then, stay tuned for the next one. Bye.
Thank you.